Okay, so this is the third video from the Next Generation Business Network, and today we're here with Matt Berkery, and he was the first place ICDC winner for the Restaurant and Food Service Management Series category. It's an individual series event for the hospitality and tourism sector. He placed second in the London School of Economics essay competition, where he discussed political polarization and how it hinders economic growth. He's an entrepreneurship fellow for the Yale Entrepreneurship Society, where he took place in an 8-week program where him and other high school students researched a topic and developed a project accordingly. And here we're today answering 3 major questions and some of the side conversations and advice for other students who are in the individual series competitions who also want to go and compete in the hospitality and tourism sector. So, Matt, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit before we go into the first question?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matt Berkery. I'm a senior at Cherry Hill High School East in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Um, I think over the course of high school, I've really become interested in business and economics, sort of how not just business and economics, like in and of itself, but the interdisciplinary connections between economics and entrepreneurship, how that can really benefit things like law, even writing, as kind of evinced by my interest in like writing competitions and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm really excited to give some tips as to how I did well in restaurant and food service management.
Okay, great. So, the first question that we have is something that confuses a lot of people when they come into DECA, because they might come into DECA, your chapter lead might tell you, listen, this is the project that you're going to do, and they might help you a little bit, and they also might redirect you to the website. And when you get to that website, it's going to be a little overwhelming, and you're going to hear 2 key words. One being performance indicator, and the second being 21st century skills. And a lot of people hear these words and they're instantly thrown off, as I was when I was a freshman in high school, so much so that I just put it to the side completely. And I said, you know what? After I moved from Brooklyn into Long Island and I was trying to get back and get into the flow of the atmosphere here, I was like, I can't focus on this. I'm going to try to focus on making some friends and connections and my classes. And I put it to the side, and that didn't allow me to succeed in DECA, and I don't want that to happen to you. So the first question is, how did you approach the performance indicators and 21st century skills to ensure that you received as many points as possible for your role play?
Yeah, of course. So I would say the 21st century life skills typically aren't things that you explicitly address. A lot of it is like shows evidence of creativity, things like that. So that more comes down to conducting yourself confidently, knowing that you're sounding intelligent and you're able to articulate the performance indicators because they're a lot more important. I would say it's definitely more of an inherent thing. It's something you can practice. So 21st century life skills, it's not you studying for something and then being able to talk about a specific topic. It's more like, are you flowing? Are you pausing between every single word and you have no clue what you're talking about? Or are you presenting something that deviates from what other students are doing? Essentially, are you thinking outside the box? That's the best way to describe it. One of them that definitely confused me is like shows evidence of systems thinking or something like that. And I was looking up like what is systems thinking? Like then I found out that it was kind of connecting the different like parts of a business and being able to group it under this umbrella. And while I tried to like sort of force it in, I think when I was initially practicing role plays, they're more asking, are you able to not only talk about, for example, hospitality and tourism or about restaurants, but are you able to tie in like economics concepts, restaurant business concepts that go beyond just hospitality? Could be like finance, it could be any of the other clusters. So that's really what it comes down to for 21st century life skills. For performance indicators, they're going to be a lot more explicit. They're going to be things that you need to really walk your judge through. So a lot of times, at least in individual series, you'll have maybe 5 per role play, and you want to write them down as you're prepping for your role play in that 10 minutes. And you want to be able to pretty much rattle off everything you want to say about that performance indicator and explicitly address it. That's like I think the biggest part of your score that you can maximize, as long as you know generally what you're talking about.
And when we prepare for these performance indicators, and you open up the web page, the sub page that has your event category, and you click the page that says performance indicators, and it's this huge document. I mean, it's 5 pages long. There's probably 100 performance indicators there. I've had one person tell me, Ethan, me and my partner, we just put down every single performance indicator on that paper. We put it in a Google Doc, and we try to answer every single one by one. And, that takes a long, long time. And I've had another person say, you know what, Ethan, I like reading the Wall Street Journal. I'm interested in this topic. I like reading and writing about it. I didn't really care to research it, and they still placed first. So what would you say for this specific competition, this specific event? How would you prepare for these performance indicators, and how would you make sure that when they're asked of you, that you understand not only how to address them, but to expand on them in a way that shows that you have the knowledge of the subject and you're not just completely yapping away? And if you start yapping away too much, they might be able to tell. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do you prepare to study these performance indicators?
Yeah, so I think what you just said is a testament to the fact that it varies person to person and event to event. And that's really the beauty of DECA, is you're able to pick an event that plays to your skill set. So I knew for the hospitality and tourism cluster that it's a lot more qualitative. Whereas if I were to do like a finance event and have to do something quantitative off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to really effectively hit those performance indicators. So I would say the best way that I studied personally, I did something a little bit similar to like going through and kind of seeing them, but it was more so that I did a bunch of practice role plays, and you'll see a lot of the same sort of performance indicators come up. So for example, I kind of called on like experiential things rather than like raw knowledge. One thing you'll see, particularly in like restaurant and food service management, is there are a lot of questions regarding like food regulations and how to keep different workspaces sanitary. And in all honesty, I didn't really know all of the regulations. I just knew there was like the FDA and there was like the Meat Inspection Act. And I learned that in A push. So drawing from like history classes and things like that, you can turn it into sort of this story where I would start off the role play like back in 1906, Upton Sinclair like published their expose of the meat industry with the jungle, things like that. And if you can make it creative and turn it into something that sounds like you know what you're talking about, even if you don't know exactly what that is, you'll still be able to sort of hit it, at least in the judge's eyes. Otherwise, I would say rather than focusing on what the performance indicator itself is saying, obviously you need to be able to address it, but you don't need to know every nuance of every single thing for every single performance indicator. I made literally on my notes app, it's like 40 different terms that come up really frequently. So one example I think I use in every single role play is the 80-20 rule. I think it's called the Pareto principle or something like that is the formal term, but it's just like 80% of the sales come from 20% of the customers. You can also say like 80% of the outputs come from 20% of the inputs. So if you have very general things like that, that you're able to tailor to each performance indicator and still be able to, again, articulate how it ties in and sort of justify it, that's oftentimes better than memorizing an entire script or an entire like list of things you need to know for each performance indicator. But again, that just works better for me because I think I'm better at yapping about like one thing and applying it versus like I don't know, memorizing everything or even just like reading a little bit and being able to turn it into something bigger.
Yeah, I agree. I think trying to memorize the script is probably the biggest mistake that you can make. And understanding a few topics and a few ideas, a few methods of business that can kind of be applied in a variety of performance indicators is probably smarter, and then tailoring that. And I actually haven't thought about it that much, but I'm going to try to implement that in my next role play. And, you know, the performance indicators and the 21st century skills, they're a huge part of your grade. But something that is unavoidable for what you're going to receive, and if you end up going to ICDC, is how you approach the cluster exam. And I've had some different people say to me that, you know, the cluster exam, they honed in on the cluster exam so much, and the role play was kind of an afterthought because all the ideas and things that they would discuss were in that cluster exam, and they kind of just took those and pawned them off as their own ideas in the role play. And I've had some people say to me that the cluster exam is pretty much irrelevant, and they would do it in the last second.
Yeah.
So I guess it really kind of depends on what your learning style is and how you can approach the event. But what tips would you give to someone studying the entrepreneurship cluster exam, and how many times did you practice it? What score were you aiming to get? Just give me some advice on that, please.
So yeah, I would say interestingly, I think I fall into the latter category of it was definitely an afterthought for me. I really only studied for the exam like on the plane going there. I did practice tests pretty much the entire way. Luckily, I live in New Jersey and it was in Anaheim, so it was like a 6 hour flight, and I was just on my iPad. Like I downloaded a bunch of them. You can just look up for your cluster. So mine was hospitality and tourism. I looked up like hospitality and tourism cluster exams. There will be a bunch of past exams. Your school might even provide them through resources like DECA Plus. I know on our like PCs at school, there's opportunities to study. So some people do take advantage of like the in-school opportunities. I was not one of those people. I definitely kind of winged it when it came to the exam. I will say that I think the exam is super important. I got a 91, and I was hoping, I knew that I would need to get around the 90 range, but I would say even a flat 90 is sort of the magic number for doing really well at ICDC. There have been a couple of ICDC winners from my school, especially like the year before I won. So this year, um, like before that, 2023, around the same score, like 91, 92. I think people definitely, I've seen online people say like you need a 99 or 100. I think I got the high. I was like 99.74% for like the percentile. So I'm pretty sure that was the highest with a 91. So don't necessarily think you need like a crazy high score. The beauty of the cluster exam is that if you do well, it carries over into your final score. The reason I focused more on the role play though was because I knew my event in particular had two role plays. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's like you have two opportunities to do well, but so does everybody else. And then also like if you're not really strong on the role play and you mess both up, your exam means nothing. So I would say definitely it's event by event for how much it matters. Also, to give a little bit of context, this was my second time going to ICDC, and I generally would say I'm like stronger with like the test taking than speaking extemporaneously, at least before like this year's ICDC. That being said, like I didn't even qualify at states, which I think is sort of an interesting story. I was not planning at all to like really grind out DECA or really perform well at ICDC. It wasn't something I envisioned until like the very last minute when I sort of decided to lock in. I was a move up. So in Jersey, it's like the top 7 for individual series advance. I was like 8th. I also took a paper to states. I finaled in both events and I didn't advance with either. So I was really lucky to get in on a drop and just make something of that. And I think the reason I focused so hard on my role play was because at states, that was what messed me up, not necessarily my exam score.
Yeah. And, I think that I'm curious because you're clearly not the average kid that kind of walks around, does the test last minute and gets a perfect score. I mean, you have a 1570 SAT, I'm sure you've done well on a multitude of AP exams. And I guess I'm curious, do you tailor your event to the courses that you're taking in school? Maybe you're taking a marketing or a finance, or I guess in your case, is there something like a hospitality and tourism course in your school, or maybe you try to look up that term on YouTube and research it that way? I'm curious, what was your method of studying for the topics and the cluster exam, or did you not study for the topics in the cluster exam on an external source and you purely focused on the DECA resources themselves?
Yeah, so I would say it's a mix of both. I was taking an entrepreneurship class, and at my school, because there is a huge like DECA culture, it's like a paper writing class. So there are a couple of those where a class is like dedicated to writing a paper. Um, but I really chose my event and tailored my studying to what I felt like my strengths were. And I would encourage everybody to do the same. So I was kind of touching on this earlier, but each cluster has sort of like a personality archetype, and you have to see which one that you fit into. Um, for example, like hospitality and tourism is very like qualitative, creative. It goes a little bit goes like
It's more
farther, I guess,
social. It's more
because like,
social. It's more social than, and as something
exactly.
like finance would, you would be more quantitative. You'd want to know the numbers, you want to know the terms, and you want to show that you understand it better than everyone else. Because if someone's asking you to invest $2 million, they want to know that you know what you're talking about. You're not just
Exactly.
rambling on. But for something with hospitality and tourism, I agree with you so much. You want to make the connection because you're trying to be hospitable to them. You're trying to show them that you have the best amenities, you have the best full board. You can take them on the most memorable experiences and trips. That's a skill that I didn't have when I tried to take the hospitality and tourism event. I like finance more. I did a finance course over the summer, and I feel like I do better with the numbers and the terms and talking about how to manage your money and how to exponentially grow your money and stay smart with your money. I don't feel like I would succeed, and this is not why I'm not going to go again in the hospitality and tourism, with trying to set people up with connections and trying to build those experiences. Even though I could try to practice it, I agree with you so much. If you really kind of want to spend maybe a minute or two thinking about what do you like to do, in your school? What do you like to do for fun? How do you learn? How do you talk? And I think you can only really figure that out with practice. So maybe like starting DECA earlier, trying other business competitions, researching. But yeah, I agree. Do you want to add anything more onto that subject? I'm sorry for cutting you off there.
No, don't worry at all. I would definitely concur with like everything you just said. It's like great too that you're able to sort of discover what you feel more comfortable in. And I will say, like, the reason I chose restaurant wasn't because I know all this stuff about the restaurant industry. Like, my family doesn't own like a fast food joint. Like, I don't know really anything about restaurant, but I also knew that it was one of those events that's very malleable. You're able to sort of get really creative with it. And that's just, I think, where I thrive more. Whereas I know there are a bunch of people like you who would do better talking about, like, they actually know the stuff through and through. They're able to present something more quantitative and talk about it analytically. And I think that's just as important of a skill. It's really just about knowing what your strengths are and playing to them. Also, like, I think in terms of like exam design, they tend to be very similar, and it can actually help if you're taking the hospitality exam, even if you're not taking like the other exams. I know like in the 10 hours maybe total that I studied for the exam, I also would just like scroll through like the entrepreneurship or like finance exams, things that I didn't know. Um like terms that I was like, I have no idea what this means. And I was able to sort of recognize them when I took the real ICDC exam. So that helps too, because not everything is necessarily contained to like your cluster's exam. They're very, very, very similar.
Okay. So, you know, the performance indicators, the 21st century skills, you want to prepare for the exam. All this is extremely important and essential for your ability to perform. But all of these topics are things that you study and you try to memorize. I'm more curious of the mindset when you're walking into that room. You have 10 minutes to prepare and 10 minutes to present. You're going to do it twice. You know it's a huge deal because, as you said, without a good presentation, your cluster exam is essentially irrelevant. And, I'm curious, during that 10-minute prep time and 10-minute presentation, how should an individual kind of approach that time? And maybe what should an individual do to prepare to make that time as effective and use it in the best way possible?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is you can't go into it nervous. You have to almost compartmentalize where you're thinking about like just the task at hand. Like you have to just use that prep time to prep. Don't think about, oh, what if this goes wrong in the role play? What if this isn't what I necessarily want to say? It will come to you if you have a cue down on paper that sort of prompts you, but you can't like overthink it. You can't think of how you'll say it. It's more just like, this is what I want to talk about. I don't know how it'll go. I just have to have the information down. The way I prep is I'll like fold a paper in half and then into thirds. So I have like 6 squares. If you do a team event, you could do the same thing, but with like 8 squares because there's 7 performance indicators. But I do 5 performance indicators. I number each box and then I have a notes box. And I note down very like specific things about the role play. So for example, if it's like, it could be like very small things that you might forget while you're talking. So if it's called like Happy Smiles Bakery, you might call it like Funny Smiles Bakery. I think I did that at like regionals. I forget what the name was, but I know I like butchered it. But you've got to like note that down. Note down if there are like specific menu items for restaurant or if there's a specific amenity for another hospitality event. Note that down. Every specific that makes it sound like you really read through, note it down. Also, I wouldn't don't waste your time reading through the case study like word by word. Just like skim through and pick up on the things that are like clearly important. Make sure you read through enough to where you know everything and you're not missing anything, but be brisk. Like don't spend more than like 30 seconds to a minute. Then rewrite all of your performance indicators in each numbered box. Because you won't have them in front of you while you're presenting, you want to make sure that you're able to say them like word for word, essentially. And then underneath all of those, like you rewrote the performance indicators. Also, like quick caveat to that, don't when I say write it word for word, write like the most important words because sometimes they're very long-winded or they have like a bunch of conjunctions and like filler words and stuff like that. Get rid of all of those and write down things that'll prompt you to say the full performance indicator without writing down the like every single word of it. Be very efficient. Like efficiency is so key when you're prepping. Then write bullet points of topics underneath each performance indicator that you're able to sort of rattle off and tie back into like your overall proposal. And all of this should take you should be bouncing back and forth over the course of the whole time. But like you want to have pretty much everything set in stone halfway through the prep time. Everything else that you make should be visuals. So have like gimmicky things, make sure it's all cohesive, but like be really creative with your visuals. Your visuals are going to be what like helps you set yourself apart. Also, I would say you don't want to sound scripted, but go into every role play with like maybe 15-second bit of just like how you're going to introduce yourself, because it really builds your confidence to go into something and to know exactly what you're going to say, because then everything else flows a lot better. So if I go into it and I'm like, good morning, may I take a seat? Thank you so much for meeting with me. My name is Matt Berkery, and then my title for X company. Something like that is just so good to have like at your disposal.